Artificial intelligence is having a big impact on almost every area of business, and HR is no exception. In fact, AI has a long history of enabling advanced capabilities such as automated video interviews and predictive talent analytics. But the trend has taken a major turn in recent years with the rise of so-called talent intelligence platforms from vendors like Eightfold AI, Gloat, and Lightcast, and the arrival in 2022 of generative AI with its human-like communication abilities. Talent intelligence is becoming embedded in every phase of talent management, from recruitment, onboarding, and learning to performance, compensation, and succession management. It could soon tackle wider challenges such as pay equity and workforce planning. HR technology analyst Josh Bersin follows talent intelligence platforms closely, and his firm recently published a comprehensive report. In the podcast, he explains what talent intelligence platforms do, where they fit with HCM suites from SAP SuccessFactors, Oracle, and Workday, and shares case studies from major companies including Coca-Cola. This is Modern HR. Josh, I recently read your new report, and I guess the first question is, how do you define a talent intelligence platform?
Well, the word or phrase talent intelligence, I started using it about, 5 or 6 years ago to describe the use of AI to intelligently assess job candidates and other people for roles and opportunities by looking at their skills and experiences and other data about them. And so originally, the concept or the technology started in recruiting. So a talent intelligence team or a talent intelligence platform was a technology or a group of people that was trying to figure out who would be good fits to sourcing into different roles. And, when we didn't really know what AI was going to do, we weren't sure how intelligent this was going to be. But it turned out over the last 5 or 6 years, now that companies are getting better at it, we can find people who are skilled or potentially adjacently skilled for jobs that are not obvious candidates. We can create more diverse candidate pools, and we can find people in locations, and we can determine which locations to source that we never knew before using these systems. So the original tools were companies like Eightfold and Beamery and a few others. Then what happened is these recruiting systems started to take off inside companies, and companies said, well, if we can, intelligently find people on the outside of the company, maybe we can intelligently find people inside the company. Let's use it for internal mobility. And by the way, now that we have more data, maybe we can use it for career planning and career growth and career path for people who we want to move out of this role into that role. And they've turned into sort of intelligent talent management systems in a way. And at the same time all that was going on, companies realized they needed a team of people who were specialists in this process. So there's more and more growth of the talent intelligence job title, which is a talent intelligence professional who knows how to use these technologies to source people and use data in different ways to do this. So it's a very, very big change in HR because generally we used to have a recruiter who just did recruiting. We had a data analyst who did maybe retention and stuff. We had a career person, an L&D person. They were all different. Well, now all of these related jobs can use these talent intelligence platforms in a more integrated way. So it's changing HR departments a lot.
I'm wondering if you could drill down a little bit into what these are like to use, because at first glance, when I look at, for example, Eightfold, it looks like it's just some kind of big, almost amorphous AI-based analytics tool, not for specific processes like recruitment or performance management. So how do people take the actual traditional steps that they need to source talent? Like, where does a platform like Eightfold show up?
So two answers to the question. First of all, when the companies like Eightfold and Beamery and others came up with this idea, they didn't really know how to use it yet. So some of the early implementations of these products, Beamery was using it for candidate relationship management and sourcing, and then Eightfold was using it for recruiting. They were basically search engines. In fact, I oftentimes think of what Eightfold really is. It's really Google of people is what it is, with much more sophisticated searching than Google has. So what they did is they've now broken down the recruiting process into steps and added features for each step. So you can use the talent intelligence platform for workforce planning. So you can say, let's look at the current company, all of our job title. By the way, you put all your current employees in it too, not just the outside world. And you say, let's look at all the skills we have inside the company, the number of jobs we're trying to hire for, where we're trending up, where we're trending down, what cities are those in, what are the pay levels of those people, and therefore where are we going to have the biggest gaps. So there's a module for that. Then you can use it for organizational design, and you can say, well, now that we have all this data about the people, why do we have 15 people with the same job in 27 different job titles around the company? Let's consolidate them. So this is an org design module. Then you can use it for sourcing. You can upload a job description, and it'll say, based on the information we have inside the company and outside the company, here's a list of candidates. That's a sourcing tool. Then as you go through interviews and start to go through the recruiting process, most of the vendors are adding tools for interview management and scheduling and some of the things that are more applicant track. In fact, Eightfold just added an ATS to their system because people asked for that. Then after people join, you want to do onboarding, so they've got to have some integration with some tool to get people on board. And then you do career management, so there's a module for career management. And then in the case of Eightfold, they also built what is called a resource management tool, so that if you're a professional services company or if you're hiring people into a consulting job, you can also use the system to say, we need to staff a project with these kinds of skills. Who are the people that have those skills so we can staff them? And how do we make them available, and how many hours, and so forth. So this core technology, which kind of was search technology, is now powering 5, 6, 7 different applications that used to be standalone software products. So these other vendors that do these other things, that I just mentioned, are either going to have to figure out how to use this kind of data system, or they're going to get acquired. Because what I really think is happening is that the AI-driven approach to doing this is so much more powerful than doing it the old way, which is calling people on the phone and reading their resume and trying to assess them over the phone or with a test, that everybody wants to do it. Seek Out is another vendor that does this, that's growing like crazy. SAP's built a product which they call Talent Intelligence that they're just in the middle of rolling out. Workday just acquired a company called HiredScore, which has a lot of talent intelligence capabilities in it. They happen to call it talent orchestration. They use a different word for it, but it's a lot of the same ideas. And then there's a whole bunch of startups working on this. Gloat does this. Gloat is a talent intelligence platform that's primarily used for internal mobility, but it's also used for recruiting. So there's real applications now. A customer who looks at this and does an A/B between a talent intelligence-based system and a non-one is usually astounded at the difference. It's changing the landscape very significantly.
You've kind of alluded to this already, but where do these platforms fit in, say, a big HCM or talent management suite that maybe a company is already using, like SAP SuccessFactors or Oracle HCM Cloud?
That's kind of the big issue. These new tools, these new platforms that are AI, these are what I would call native AI, so they're AI from the bottom up, are so exciting that the ERPs, Oracle, SAP, Workday, UKG, Ultimate, ADP, they want to have something like this. They're a little bit schizophrenic at the moment of whether they should partner with a talent intelligence system or they should build their own. Now, Workday, for example, partners with Beamery. They don't partner yet with Eightfold. SAP is very close with Eightfold at the moment, even though they're trying to build something of their own. The ultimate goal is the customer who already has a big HR system and wants to use one of these more advanced systems on top of it, doesn't want to hire a systems integrator to connect them together. That's a big slowdown. So they would like these things to be integrated. But of course, if you're a software company and you see AI as your next big thing, do you really want to integrate with somebody who could end up being a competitor to you, or should you build it? In most cases, this takes a while. It takes years for these AI-based talent systems to really work well. So The vendors that are successful at it have been doing it for 5, 6, 7 years. They didn't just do it in 12 months. So I think the ERPs are going to have a hard time building this, and I think they're going to try, but I think it's going to be a series of acquisitions. I would predict that Gloat will be acquired, Eightfold could be acquired, Beamery could be acquired. I mean, I haven't written this in a blog, but it's more likely that the big payroll HCM vendors buy a talent intelligence platform and then integrate it in than that the talent intelligence platforms turn into ERPs. That's a much harder direction for those companies to go.
I was just going to ask you, I think you've already answered just now, whether these things are so strong, these new platforms, that they are true competitors.
They're competitors to some of the revenue streams of the big vendors because if you're Workday, Oracle, SAP, and you're selling a recruiting module or a training module or a career module, that's a significant value proposition of what you're selling. And so if the customer says, "Well, I don't want any of that stuff. I just want your basic HRMS and payroll," all of a sudden you look like a commodity. So they don't want to give that up.
In the report that I read that your company put out, it said that talent intelligence platforms started around 2010. So that seems like a long time ago now, especially in this business. How have they evolved in roughly a decade and a half?
Well, in the early days, nobody knew what they were. So nobody could, because we weren't using the word AI yet. So if you tried to tell somebody in 2010 you had an AI system, they would think you're nuts. They were like, well, we're not interested. So they had a very hard time explaining, how they were doing what they were doing. Then there were questions about where'd you get the data? Is that is it confidential? Is it safe? Did you pay for that data? Is it accurate? So there's been a lot of learning about how these systems work to trust them. Do we trust the data? Do we trust the system? Then there was a period of time where, you know, when ChatGPT got launched, which is almost 2 years ago, everybody slapped the word AI onto everything they already had. So then there was confusion about where's the real AI and where's the pretend AI? And so these vendors that started, 8 to 10 years earlier were suddenly challenged that it sounded like everybody had what they had built, but they didn't. So what you find in the buying process is, you can sort of evaluate the vendors based on checklists, but when they actually do benchmarks and demos and real use cases, the talent intelligence vendors way outperform the traditional vendors. So there was that confusion. And now it's a legitimate category. I mean, it wasn't so much of a legitimate category for a long time, but now it is.
The original platforms used the AI that was available back then, machine learning, pattern matching, neural nets, which still using, but this is before generative AI made its big splash around 2 years ago. So how has generative AI changed these intelligence platforms?
As I understand it, what's happened is the algorithms and the AI models that were built before ChatGPT are getting way better and way more powerful and running faster. I think the mathematics are similar, but most of the vendors are realizing that there's features in, by the way, it isn't just ChatGPT, it's Google Cloud, Amazon, Anthropic, all of these API driven cloud platforms are now available to HR software companies to build intelligent systems. So if you were a recruiting tool and you had an applicant tracking system and you just didn't know anything about AI, now you can basically sign up for one of these API driven hyperscaler platforms and you can start doing AI like in a week or in a day. So it's much, much easier now to enhance these systems, and new ones are entering the market. I mean, there's actually at least a dozen new talent intelligence companies that are fairly small that are coming into the market now that have various different positions. The challenge, though, that they have is they got to sell it to HR people. So, you can be a technical whiz kid and you can build anything you want, but you got to convince an HR person to buy it. So if it doesn't solve an HR problem, it doesn't matter if the technology is great. So it's accelerated the space. And it's not lost on the big vendors. All of the big vendors, including ADP, I mean, they all really want to have a much more AI-driven back end. So the older the company is, the vendor is, the harder it is to replace what they have, but it's going on everywhere. Like if you look at SAP, for example, SAP has a very sophisticated AI strategy now to inject generative AI and machine learning into dozens and dozens of the modules in the HR, in the SuccessFactors platform to do lots and lots of things. Not all of it is what I would call talent intelligence, but they've really invested in it. Same thing with Workday. Workday has a lot of generative AI projects that are turning into features of Workday that weren't available before. But that core underlying idea of amassing 1 billion employee records and analyzing all of it is really specialized vendors at the moment. I think the competitive dynamics up until the last 12 months or so, most of the big software vendors could ignore the talent intelligence vendors because they were relatively small, kind of noise making irritants. Now they're getting bigger. So the ex-president of Workday now is the co-president of Eightfold. They're attracting much more senior executives to work in these companies to run them. So the challenge in most HR software companies isn't the product, it's the sales. It's getting in front of the customers and convincing them that this is something that's worth spending their money on. So more senior salespeople are moving into this dynamic. People from SAP and Oracle and Workday are moving to work for these companies. They're getting much more savvy about marketing. I think the competition's getting tougher. I think there's going to be more competition, and that's why I think this at some point there's going to be some big, acquisitions going on.
So your report says that talent intelligence platforms are moving beyond their initial use in recruiting to other use cases. What are the other use cases that you think look the most promising in terms of what's actually available now and maybe the potential payback from using them now?
Well, recruiting's the big one, but right next to recruiting is internal talent mobility, recruiting people internally, which then leads to career planning. What skills do you need? By the way, we're going to be launching a product, David, on August 20th for career planning for HR people. HR, we're calling it the HR Career Navigator, that's built on a talent intelligence platform, so HR people can experience this directly. Then there's the learning part of it. If I want a new career, I want to know what skills I need. How do I find those skills? How do I develop those skills? The AI systems can help you find the content and the courses and the people you need to develop yourself. Then there's what I mentioned earlier, which is resource management. If I need to staff a project or a client team, who are the people in the company I should be looking for and where are they? What's their availability? Then there's leadership development. Heidrick and Struggles now has an offering called the Heidrick Navigator, which uses the Eightfold technology to assess leaders. So you can look across the organization, not only look for technical skills, but you can look at leadership potential and leadership skills. So it's starting to get smarter about understanding soft skills. And then the next big area is going to be pay. Because, if you look at the research we just published last week on pay equity, pay is all over the place. People are paid different amounts of money for the same job because of their job history, because of their gender, because of their educational background, because of their city, and so forth. So there's all these discrepancies on what fair pay really looks like. If you look at pay as another metadata field in a large organization, the talent intelligence system could point out very easily obvious pay discrepancies that you may not be aware of. So I think it's going to be used for pay equity and also for performance management, because if you take the data about business performance, sales performance, operating performance, product performance, marketing performance, etc., and you put it into the talent intelligence system and match it up against the employee profiles you have, the AI will give you an analysis of who's performing the highest at what level, by what role, by what tenure, etc., just like we try to do in core systems. So there's a lot of stuff yet to be rolled out that this can be used for. It's basically an open data system that can make sense of, this amorphous, human capital investment you have inside your company in more and more ways. So that's why I'm so high on it, and I think it is going to just become a core part of HR systems.
I saw some interesting case studies in your report. Can you share one or two of the best that you think really maybe illustrate the potential here?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot. Let me give you Chevron, for example. So Chevron is a very well run, very sophisticated company with very strong HR skills and capabilities. Obviously, moving into evaluating different forms of alternative energy, shale, solar, mining, batteries, etc. So they set out to hire energy engineers that would help them plan their energy future. Most of the engineers who work at Chevron are oil and gas engineers or petroleum engineers or hydrocarbon engineers. So, I actually studied mechanical engineering. So there's another sort of bunch of new roles they needed. But they didn't know exactly what those skills were. They just knew kind of generally what they were looking for. So they kept looking for these jobs called energy engineers, and they could never find them because they didn't really know how to define the background or the skills completely because they were new. So they ended up using a talent intelligence platform, and they took the job descriptions of the roles that they were trying to hire for, narrative descriptions of what these people are going to do, put it into the system, and the system found them people in different parts of the country, in the world, that had the relevant skills to do that work that were completely non-obvious candidates. And that completely changed their sourcing strategy. So they went from a period of 6 to 9 months where they couldn't hire anybody because they couldn't figure out who to hire, to all of a sudden, within a few months of doing this analysis, being pinpoint laser clear on exactly who they needed for these roles. And that made Chevron smarter about what these roles are and where the skills are in the marketplace. When you just have this blanket job where you think this person can do everything, you don't really know, whether that person exists. It's called a purple squirrel in the recruiting domain. But if you really know, here's a person A who has these skills, here's person B who has these skills, all of a sudden you can get a lot smarter about who you want to hire and how you want to structure the work. So that was a big win for them. So that's number one. Another one that's a little bit in a different domain, I won't mention the name of the company, but a large retailer in the United States, one of the largest retailers in the United States, has lots of issues with turnover, as all retailers do. And they're pretty good at hiring the entry level, this is a company that does coffee and, food service stuff. Pretty good at hiring, the entry level. But the district managers and the senior regional managers are very hard to develop because it takes time. They have to work in the company for a while, and they have a huge shortage of them. And the career paths are sort of limited in those roles. So they needed to move people more quickly up the leadership pipeline from individual contributors to store managers, to regional managers, district managers. And they didn't really have any good way to do that. So they used a talent intelligence platform to look at the entire population of existing employees, the entire population of first, second, third line managers in the field organization, compare the skills of those people, and suddenly build a clear career trajectory. By the way, another company did the same thing, a sporting goods company basically did the same thing, to figure out how to build regional and district managers much, much faster and who would be the right successors for that. Theoretically, HR people could have done that by hand, but it would have been, a huge amount of work. So their leadership pipeline is now much, much stronger than it was before, and they have a much clearer understanding of how to build that leadership pipeline. Third example is a bank that has about 60% of their employees are in back office operations. Most people don't realize, but behind the scenes of most banks, there's just thousands of people running around doing tech stuff and paperwork and transactional stuff. And, this one particular HR executive was responsible for operations, and he was trying to build project management skills and product management skills and analytics skills. And he used the talent intelligence platform to look at these skills across the company. And he found, as I talked about earlier, a lot of people who had these skills that didn't have the job title of project manager, product manager, or business analyst. They were in different roles. So he said, well, why don't we at least get these people into the same domain so they can talk to each other and build what we call capability groups or capability academies to develop these people and bring them together. And once he started doing that, of course, they all had a lot of things to share with each other. Then he said, well, maybe we should have common job titles. Maybe we should have common job levels. Maybe we should talk about how we source skills in these areas. Maybe you guys want to work together and share projects with each other. All sorts of positive productivity things happened because they could see the organization in a skills-based view that they could never see before. And that is, sometimes called organizational design or organizational intelligence. There's no good name for it, but that's another, huge use case that is out there that a lot of companies would love to do.
How do you think companies should get started trying to bring more intelligence into their HR processes and systems? And what are some of the challenges you think they're most likely to face? For example, it seems like getting good data in would be a big part of it.
Actually, that's not the challenge. Usually, the challenge is somebody's come up with some project called the skills-based organization, and they don't know where to start. That's the big issue in the market right now is everybody knows that skills data is important for a variety of things, but they don't know how to assess it. They don't know where to get it. They don't know what systems to use. They don't know how to apply it to recruiting. They don't know how to apply it to career. They don't know how to apply it to this, that, and the other. So as soon as they go through that, they start looking at vendors that have all these different kinds of skills tools. And eventually they realize, hopefully, that there is a class of vendors that have this massive expertise in this AI-driven talent intelligence space. And then they have to decide, do they want a specialized vendor that does one thing, or do they want a vendor that does a lot of things? Because the vendors tend to be specialized in the areas they started. Some of them are doing talent intelligence for internal mobility. Some of them are doing talent intelligence for sourcing. Some of them are doing talent intelligence for a whole variety of enterprise applications. Some of them are doing talent intelligence for learning and development and career planning. And I would say that the standalone application vendors tend to be falling away at the moment because people want this all in one place. Because I don't want one AI tool for sourcing, one AI tool for development, one AI tool for career, one AI tool for org design. I don't want 6 of these. Each of them has different data sets. I want one system with one skills database using massive amounts of data together. So I think the problem is usually clarifying the problem you want to solve first, then looking at the vendors that can address that problem, and then making sure you're clear on how this thing architecturally is going to fit into the rest of your HR technology stack, because these things are relatively new. As far as, where does the data come from and where does it have good data, there actually is another step, which is if you're Coca-Cola bottlers or if you're Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, the talent intelligence vendor you select better have data about the kinds of workers you have in your company. Those are completely different worker sets. There's also a little bit of a benchmarking or testing process of making sure that the vendor you like actually has data that's relevant to your company. And that's kind of a pilot process that people go through. One of the clients we talked to actually took a bunch of job titles from their operating units and sent them to each vendor and said, come back and tell us what you think the skills are in these jobs. And then they compared the RFP, essentially, responses across the different vendors with, by the way, by the line leaders, not just by HR, to see which ones seemed like they had the data that was most relevant to their industry. And I think that's going to be more and more what companies are going to need to do.
That seems like a great way to vet the vendors and
Yeah,
get down to your short list.
yeah,
Well, Josh, this has been interesting and insightful as always. I really appreciate your time today.
sure. Thank you, David.